Question 1, concentric zone model, Hoyt's sector model, and multiple nuclei model. A says to explain all three models in detail. You can go off your notes. I'm kind of going to give you a rundown here, very similar to the notes. The concentric zone model, which is labeled as A on the picture here, was created in 1923 by E.W. Burgess, and it views cities as growing outward from a central area in a series of concentric rings, much like the growth of rings on trees. The size and width of rings vary from city to city. Zone 1, the innermost zone, is the CBD, where non-residential activities are concentrated. Very few residences exist in this ring, and property costs are very high in this ring. Zone 2 is known as the zone of transition. It contains light industry and housing for the poor, and it serves as a transition zone between the businesses in the central business district and the more purely residential areas in the outer zones. Industries located in Zone 2 may be too large to fit into the relatively small Zone 1 or central business district, or maybe the owners are just seeking cheaper land. Houses in this area may have been formerly occupied by wealthy who have moved further out, and the houses are starting to deteriorate. Zone 3, this zone contains working class homes, modest older houses, and small lots occupied by stable working class families. Housing here is less expensive than in the outer rings. Zone 4, as rings get further from the central business district, the homes get larger and more expensive. Zone 4 consists of middle-class residences, either single-family homes or high-rent apartments occupied by those wealthy enough to choose the locations and afford the higher costs of transportation into the CBD. And then Zone 5 is known as the commuter's zone. This is the final ring. It's the furthest away from the CBD, and it's beyond the continuous buildup area of the city. And people live in small villages where they spend their leisure hours sleeping, and they commute into the central business district for work. Burgess's model is dynamic and it's ever-changing. The rings grow larger. They invade spaces of rings further out. And he explains that neighborhoods change through a process of invasion and succession, with succeeding poorer inhabitants driving wealthier residents further and further away from the cities. B, that you see here, is the sector model. This was developed by Homer Hoyt in 1939. It's a variant of the concentric zone model. According to Hoyt, the city develops in a series of sectors, not rings, as Burgess described. These sectors may be determined by environmental factors, or they may develop on their own. Hoyt, like Burgess, notes that as the city grows, residential areas once occupied by the wealthy filter down to the middle class and then eventually filter down to the lower class. The overall pattern of land does not reflect unbroken circles like Burgess. Once a district is established for industry, other industries will cluster around, creating a wedge like you see in the visual. Then C, the multiple nuclei model. The concentric and sector models assume urban growth and development outward from a single central business district, which originally had been the size of the first settlement. The multiple nuclei model, developed in 1945 by geographers C. D. Harris and E. L. Ullman, counters that large cities develop by spreading from several nodes of growth, not just one. Individual nodes usually have special functions like parts, neighborhood businesses, universities, airports, and different levels of residences. This model explains that incompatible land use activities do not cluster in the same location, so the nodes influence the type of development that occurs around them. These clusters expand as cities grow. Letter B says to highlight the differences between all three and the similarities between all three. What I'm going to do for you is label 3 differences for each one, and then we're going to go back and label 3 similarities for each one. First one I'm going to look at is A, the concentric zone model. One difference from the concentric zone model from all these other ones is that we have circles. Another difference is that the further away from the CBD you go, the higher class of people you have, the higher class of housing. And then the concentric zone model, the difference is there's no transportation systems that are built into the model. Then moving on to the sector model. In the sector model, there's sectors with one nuclei. Another difference, the high class radiates out from the central business district. You can see that radiating out here. And transportation is built into the sector model, and its sector is there. Then moving on to C, the multiple nuclei model. This model has sectors, but then there's multiple nuclei. Imagine that, being labeled the multiple nuclei model. The high class residential area is totally outside of the central business district, and transportation is not necessarily included, but it's built in so that they can get to the central business district. And that kind of leads, to the last difference for the multiple nuclei model. There's no transportation visible in the model, but we assume it's there to get the high-class residents into the central business district. Now we're going to label the similarities between all three. One similarity is that they all have some form of a central business district, even if there's more than one. Number two, all of these are a model for urban land use and a model for the layout of cities. And number three, all of these factor in where people live based on social class.